The dust-laden wind carried Priscilla Owens's last letter of hope as the stagecoach rattled to a halt in front of Lewiston's only hotel. Montana Territory, 1885, a place where the mountains touched the sky and the promise of a new beginning had beckoned her across 1,000 miles of heartache. "Last stop, Lewiston," the driver called, his voice as rough as the journey had been. Priscilla gathered her skirts and stepped down onto Montana soil for the first time, clutching the crumpled advertisement that had brought her here, a promise of marriage to Judge Harrington Wilson. A man she'd never met, but had corresponded with for 6 months. A man who needed a wife and had agreed to pay her passage west in exchange for matrimony. "You must be Miss Owens," an elderly woman said, approaching with a kind smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. "I'm Mrs. Abernathy, the judge's housekeeper. We've been expecting you." "Yes, that's me." "How do you do?" Priscilla replied, attempting to smooth the wrinkles from her traveling dress. At 23, she had left behind everything familiar in Boston: the empty house where her parents had died of influenza, the mounting debts, and the whispers that followed a single woman with no prospects. Mrs. Abernathy's smile faltered. "I'm afraid there's been a complication. The judge would like to speak with you right away." Priscilla's heart sank as she followed the housekeeper down Lewiston's main street. The town was smaller than she'd imagined, a single dusty thoroughfare lined with wooden buildings, nothing like the grand descriptions in Judge Wilson's letters. The courthouse stood 2 stories tall at the far end of town, its white paint peeling in the harsh Montana sun. Inside, Judge Wilson sat behind a massive oak desk, his spectacles perched on the end of his nose as he examined papers that Priscilla recognized as her own letters. "Miss Owens," he said without standing, his voice cold and formal, "I regret to inform you that our arrangement must be dissolved." "I don't understand," Priscilla said, her voice barely above a whisper. "Your last letter confirmed everything." The judge cleared his throat, still not meeting her eyes. "That was before I received a more suitable offer. The daughter of a cattle baron from Helena has agreed to become my wife. The wedding is next month. But my passage, my belongings—" "I've sold everything to come here," Priscilla said, fighting to maintain her composure. "Yes, well, unfortunate timing." Judge Wilson pushed an envelope across the desk. "This should cover your return fare. I suggest you take tomorrow's stage back east." Priscilla stared at the envelope but didn't touch it. "And where am I to go? I have nothing left in Boston." "That is hardly my concern, Miss Owens. Our agreement was conditional, and I've made my decision." He finally looked up, his expression stern. "This territory is no place for a woman alone. Return to civilization where you belong." The humiliation burned hotter than the tears threatening to spill down her cheeks. She'd traveled over 2,000 miles, left behind everything familiar, only to be dismissed like an unwanted parcel. "I will not be returning east," she said with a firmness that surprised even herself. "I've come to build a life here, and that's what I intend to do." Judge Wilson scoffed. "And how do you propose to do that? You have no skills, no connections, no husband to provide for you." "Lewiston has no place for she'll have a place with me." The deep voice came from the doorway. Priscilla turned to find a tall man leaning against the doorframe, dusty from the trail with a battered Stetson in his hand. His face was tanned and weathered, but his blue eyes were clear and direct as they met hers. "Parker Montgomery," he said with a slight nod in her direction before turning his attention to the judge. "I couldn't help overhearing your predicament, Judge. Seems mighty dishonorable to leave a lady stranded after inviting her all this way." Judge Wilson's face reddened. "This is a private matter, Montgomery. It doesn't concern you." "I believe it does now." Parker stepped fully into the room, his spurs jingling softly with each deliberate step. "You see, I've been looking for a wife myself. Never got around to writing those fancy advertisements, though." Priscilla found her voice. "Mr. Montgomery, I appreciate your gallantry, but you don't even know me." His smile was slow and measured. "I know enough, Miss Owens. I know you've got courage to travel across the country alone. I know you're standing your ground instead of slinking away. That tells me more about your character than 100 letters could." "This is absurd," Judge Wilson sputtered. "You can't just, where's your marriage license?" Parker interrupted, his voice still calm but with an edge of steel beneath it. The judge reluctantly pulled a document from his desk drawer. "It's right here," but Parker took the paper and studied it, then held it out to Priscilla. "Marriage license for the territory of Montana. Your name's already filled in, Miss Owens. All it needs is the groom's signature beside yours." He pulled a pencil from his vest pocket. "I'll sign my name beside yours if you'll have me." Priscilla stared at the document, then at the stranger offering her salvation. "Mr. Montgomery, this is unconventional." "That's the West for you, madam. Unconventional." His eyes softened. "I've got a decent ranch 10 miles outside of town. It's not fancy, but it's mine, free and clear. I can offer you a home and my protection. Everything else, well, that can come with time and acquaintance." "This is completely irregular and possibly illegal," the judge protested. "Nothing illegal about two people agreeing to marry," Parker replied without taking his eyes off Priscilla. "Unless you've got a specific objection to file, Your Honor." The judge fell silent, his mouth pressed into a thin line. Priscilla studied Parker Montgomery, his worn but clean clothes, the calluses visible on his outstretched hand, the directness in his gaze that held no deceit she could detect. She'd come west to marry a stranger anyway. At least this stranger had shown her more kindness in 5 minutes than Judge Wilson had in 6 months of correspondence. "Why would you do this for someone you don't know?" she asked quietly. "Maybe I'm tired of eating my own cooking," Parker replied with a hint of humor. Then, more seriously, "Maybe I recognize someone who deserves better than being thrown away. Maybe I just believe that sometimes the right things happen at the wrong times, and we need to be ready to recognize them." Priscilla took a deep breath, feeling the weight of the decision. She had exactly 2 options: accept this cowboy's offer or take the stage back to a life of destitution in Boston. "Very well, Mr. Montgomery," she said finally. "I accept your proposal." Parker nodded once, then turned to the judge. "We'll need you to make this official, Your Honor." Judge Wilson looked as if he might refuse, but something in Parker's steady gaze changed his mind. With obvious reluctance, he retrieved his Bible. "Sign the license first," he ordered. Parker held the pencil out to Priscilla. With a slightly trembling hand, she signed her name on the bride's line. Parker took the pencil and, without hesitation, wrote his name beside hers. The ceremony that followed was brief and perfunctory. When the judge pronounced them man and wife, Parker didn't attempt to kiss her, merely offering his arm instead. "I'll get your things from the hotel," he said as they stepped outside into the fading afternoon light. "Everything I own is in that carpet bag," Priscilla admitted, pointing to where the stagecoach had left her luggage. Parker's expression revealed nothing as he picked up the small bag. "Traveling light has its advantages. My wagon's down at Thompson's store. I need to pick up supplies before we head to the ranch." As they walked down the street, curious eyes followed them. Priscilla could feel the weight of stares and whispers. News traveled fast in small towns. "I know this isn't what you expected," Parker said quietly. "But I give you my word, I'll treat you with respect." Priscilla nodded, unable to form words past the knot in her throat. Everything had happened so quickly she felt as if she were in a dream or perhaps a nightmare. She had left Boston with such hopes, such carefully constructed plans. Now she was married to a complete stranger, heading to a ranch she'd never seen. Parker's wagon was loaded with supplies, sacks of flour and sugar, coffee beans, ammunition, and various tools. He helped her onto the high seat with unexpected gentleness, then climbed up beside her and took the reins. As they left Lewiston behind, Priscilla finally found her voice again. "I should thank you, I suppose." "No need for that," Parker replied, keeping his eyes on the trail ahead. "We made a fair exchange. You needed a husband, I needed a wife." "But why did you need a wife today, at that exact moment?" she pressed. Parker was silent for so long that Priscilla thought he might not answer. When he finally spoke, his voice was quieter. "I've been alone a long time, Miss Owens, Mrs. Montgomery now, I suppose. I wasn't planning on marrying today, but when I saw how that judge treated you." He shook his head. "Some things just ain't right. A man should honor his word." "And will you honor yours?" she asked, meeting his gaze directly for the first time. "Yes, madam, I will." He turned his attention back to the road. I won't lie to you, ranching life is hard, especially for a city woman, but you'll have a roof over your head, food on the table, and you won't have to worry about anyone mistreating you while I'm around. The sun was setting by the time they reached the Montgomery ranch. It was smaller than Priscilla had imagined, but well-maintained, a sturdy log house with a wide porch, a barn, corral, and several outbuildings nestled in a valley with mountains rising majestically in the distance. It's not much compared to Boston, Parker said, watching her face. It's beautiful, Priscilla replied honestly, taking in the vast open spaces and the way the last rays of sunlight gilded everything in gold. For the first time that day, she felt a small spark of hope. Parker helped her down from the wagon and carried her carpet bag inside. The house was simple but clean: a main room with a stone fireplace, a kitchen area with a cast iron stove, and doors leading to what she presumed were bedrooms. I'll sleep in the bunkhouse tonight, Parker said, setting her bag down. Give you time to settle in. Bedrooms through there, kitchen stocked, make yourself at home. The bunkhouse? Priscilla questioned. It's where I usually keep hands during roundup, but it's empty now. He shifted uncomfortably. I know this ain't conventional, but I figure we should take some time to get acquainted before we're truly husband and wife. The thoughtfulness of the gesture surprised her. Thank you, she said softly. Parker nodded. I'll be up at dawn to tend the stock. Don't worry about cooking breakfast. We can figure out how things will work tomorrow. After he left, Priscilla stood in the middle of the room, overwhelmed by the events of the day. She'd left Boston a mail-order bride with dreams of becoming a respected judge's wife. Now she was a rancher's wife, in a home she'd never seen before today, married to a man whose full name she'd learned only hours ago. She explored the house, finding it surprisingly comfortable despite its rustic appearance. The bedroom was simply furnished with a bed, chest of drawers, and washstand. She unpacked her meager belongings, changed into her nightgown, and crawled between clean but worn sheets. As exhaustion claimed her, Priscilla wondered what tomorrow would bring. She'd come west seeking security and a fresh start. Instead, she'd found uncertainty and an even greater unknown. But as she drifted to sleep, she realized that for the first time in years, she wasn't alone. Morning came with the crowing of a rooster and the distant sounds of activity from the barn. Priscilla dressed quickly in her plainest dress and pinned her hair in a simple style. Despite Parker's words, she couldn't remain idle while he worked. She found coffee and cornmeal in the kitchen, and soon had a pot of coffee brewing and cornmeal mush cooking on the stove. It was modest fare, but the best she could manage with unfamiliar supplies and an unfamiliar stove. Parker appeared at the door just as she was setting the table. He'd already been working for hours, judging by the sweat staining his shirt and the dust on his boots. You didn't have to cook, he said, removing his hat. I wanted to make myself useful. She gestured to the basin of water she'd set out. You can wash up if you like. A hint of a smile touched his lips as he rolled up his sleeves and washed his hands and face. They sat down to the simple breakfast in awkward silence. I should explain how things work around here, Parker said finally. I've got about 60 head of cattle, 10 horses, some chickens, and a milk cow. It's not a big spread, but it's growing. I usually handle everything myself except during roundup when I hire a couple of hands. Priscilla nodded. What will my duties be? Whatever you're comfortable with. The house is yours to run as you see fit. I've been managing on my own, but I reckon a woman's touch would be welcome. He hesitated. I know you're probably used to finer things coming from Boston. It'll take some adjustment. I wasn't wealthy in Boston, Mr. Montgomery. My father was a school teacher and my mother a seamstress. After they died, I couldn't maintain our home. That's why I answered the judge's advertisement. Parker studied her. Call me Parker. Seems strange for my wife to call me Mr. Montgomery. And I'm Priscilla, she replied. I want you to know that I'm not afraid of hard work. I may not know much about ranching, but I can learn. I believe you will. He finished his coffee. I need to mend the north fence line today. I'll be back by sundown. After he left, Priscilla turned her attention to the house. Though reasonably clean, it clearly lacked a woman's care. She spent the day scrubbing floors, washing windows, and rearranging furniture to make the space more welcoming. In the kitchen, she inventoried supplies and planned meals, grateful for the cooking skills her mother had taught her. By late afternoon, she had bread baking in the oven and a stew simmering on the stove. The physical labor had kept her mind occupied, preventing her from dwelling too much on the strangeness of her situation. Parker returned as the sun was setting, pausing at the door to remove his dusty boots. He stopped mid-motion, looking around the transformed house with surprise. "Something smells good," he said, his eyes taking in the clean floors, the rearranged furniture, and the wildflowers she'd gathered in a jar on the table. "I hope you like beef stew," Priscilla replied. "I found some vegetables in the root cellar." They ate dinner with less awkwardness than breakfast, Parker telling her about the ranch and its history. He'd been in Montana for 8 years, working first as a ranch hand, then saving enough to buy his own small spread. Each year he'd added to his herd and improved the property. "My pa always said a man needs to build something that lasts," he explained. "This place is my something." "It's a fine something," Priscilla said sincerely. That night, Parker again retreated to the bunkhouse, leaving Priscilla alone with her thoughts. The day's work had exhausted her, but as she drifted off to sleep, she realized she felt more purposeful than she had in years. Days passed in a similar fashion, gradually forming a routine. Priscilla learned the rhythms of ranch life, when to expect Parker for meals, how to manage the kitchen garden that had been neglected, how to collect eggs without antagonizing the hens. She discovered an old treadle sewing machine in a corner and began repairing Parker's shirts and mending the worn curtains. Parker, for his part, remained respectful and distant, returning to the bunkhouse each night. During the days, he worked from dawn until dusk, only occasionally asking for her help with tasks requiring an extra pair of hands. Their conversations remained practical, focusing on the immediate needs of the ranch. A week after her arrival, Priscilla decided to venture into town for additional supplies. Parker offered to drive her in the wagon, but she insisted he continue his work on the new corral. "I can manage the buggy," she assured him. "You showed me the way, and the mare is gentle." Reluctantly, he agreed, helping her hitch the small buggy to the mare. "Be back before dark," he cautioned. "The trail gets tricky in the twilight." Lewiston looked different through the eyes of Mrs. Parker Montgomery than it had to Priscilla Owens, abandoned bride. She held her head high as she tied the mare outside Thompson's general store and went inside with her list. Mr. Thompson greeted her with curious politeness. "Mrs. Montgomery, good to see you settling in." As she gathered her purchases, Priscilla felt eyes on her. Turning, she found herself face to face with Judge Wilson's housekeeper, Mrs. Abernathy. "Well," the older woman said with barely concealed disdain, "if it isn't the mail-order bride who found herself a cowboy instead of a judge." Priscilla straightened her shoulders. "Good day, Mrs. Abernathy." "I trust the judge is well, preparing for his wedding. Miss Harrington arrives from Helena next week." Mrs. Abernathy leaned closer. "Such a refined lady, just what the judge needs. I wish them every happiness," Priscilla replied evenly. "And how is married life treating you?" "Must be quite a change from what you expected." The woman's eyes gleamed with malicious curiosity. "Montgomery's place is hardly the judge's mansion. My husband provides very well for me, thank you." Priscilla turned back to Mr. Thompson. "I'll also need 5 yards of that blue gingham, please." As she completed her purchases, Priscilla overheard whispers from 2 women by the dry goods. "Married not 10 minutes after she arrived, poor thing. Desperate arrangement if I ever saw one. Wonder if she knows about his past." Priscilla's hand faltered as she counted out coins. What past? She realized with sudden clarity how little she knew about the man she'd married. She hurried through the rest of her errands, stopping briefly at the post office to mail a letter to her former neighbor in Boston, informing her of her marriage and new address. The sun was still well above the horizon when she started the journey home, her mind churning with questions. What had those women meant about Parker's past? Was there something he hadn't told her? Lost in thought, she almost missed the approaching rider until he was alongside her buggy. The stranger tipped his hat, revealing a face that bore a strong resemblance to her husband's, though younger and less weathered. "Madam," he greeted her, "you must be Parker's new wife. Word travels fast in these parts." "Yes, I'm Priscilla Montgomery," she replied cautiously. "Preston Montgomery," he introduced himself with a charming smile that didn't quite reach his eyes. "Parker's brother. I've been away on business in Helena, just rode in and heard the news." Priscilla's surprise must have shown on her face because Preston's smile widened. "Ah, he didn't mention me." Typical Parker, keeping things close to the vest. "He hasn't spoken much about his family," she admitted. "That's because family's a complicated subject for my brother." Preston fell in beside her buggy as they traveled. "I'm headed to the ranch myself. Mind if I ride along?" Priscilla couldn't think of a polite way to refuse. Of course not. As they traveled, Preston asked seemingly innocent questions about her background and her marriage, his manner friendly but somehow unsettling. When the ranch came into view, Priscilla felt an unexpected wave of relief. Parker was working in the corral when they arrived. He looked up at the sound of hooves, his expression changing instantly when he saw who accompanied his wife. "Preston," he said, his voice flat and hard in a way Priscilla had never heard before. "What are you doing here?" "Is that any way to greet your only brother?" Preston dismounted with fluid grace. "Or to introduce him to your new bride? I had to learn about your marriage in town." The tension between the brothers was palpable. Parker moved to help Priscilla down from the buggy, positioning himself subtly between her and Preston. "Priscilla, would you mind taking the supplies inside?" he asked, his eyes never leaving his brother. "Preston and I need to talk." Reluctantly, she gathered her purchases and went into the house, though she couldn't help glancing back at the two men facing each other in the yard. Their voices rose and fell, too distant to make out words, but their body language spoke volumes. Through the window, she watched their conversation grow more heated until Preston threw up his hands and stalked back to his horse. Parker remained still, watching as his brother rode away. When Parker finally came inside, his face was set in hard lines. "I'm sorry you had to meet Preston that way," he said, removing his hat and placing it on a peg by the door. "He seems interesting," Priscilla replied carefully. Parker's laugh held no humor. "That's one word for him." He rubbed a hand over his face. "Preston has a talent for finding trouble. Or causing it. In town, I overheard something." Priscilla hesitated. "Some women mentioned your past. They seem to think I might not know about it." Parker went very still. "Did Preston say anything to you?" "No, just that family is complicated for you." He nodded slowly. "I suppose I owe you some explanations, but not tonight. Tomorrow I'll take you to the North Pasture. It's my favorite place on the ranch. We can talk there." True to his word, the next day Parker saddled 2 horses after breakfast. "Ever ridden before?" he asked as he brought them to the house. "A few times in the park with my father, but never a Western saddle," she admitted. "Daisy's gentle," he assured her, helping her mount the smaller of the 2 horses. "Just follow my lead." The ride took them through a pine forest and up a gentle slope. When they emerged from the trees, Priscilla gasped. Below them stretched the entire valley, the ranch buildings tiny in the distance, with mountains rising on all sides. Wildflowers carpeted the meadow in splashes of color, and a small stream bubbled nearby. Parker dismounted and helped her down, then secured the horses where they could graze. He led her to a flat rock overlooking the valley, and they sat side by side. "This is beautiful," Priscilla said. "My father showed me this place when I was 10, Parker replied. "Said someday it would all be Montgomery land." He was right, but not the way he imagined. "Tell me," Priscilla encouraged softly. Parker was quiet for a long moment, gathering his thoughts. "My father was William Montgomery. He came west with nothing but ambition and a willingness to do whatever it took to succeed. By the time I was born, he owned the biggest ranch in the territory and had his sights set on becoming the next cattle baron." "That sounds impressive," Priscilla observed. "On the surface," Parker agreed. "But my father built his empire by taking what he wanted. He drove smaller ranchers out, diverted water rights, and wasn't above using force when necessary. Preston and I grew up watching him crush anyone who stood in his way. He picked up a small stone and turned it over in his hands. When I was 18, I discovered he'd forged land deeds to expand our property. I confronted him, and he told me that was how the West was won, said I'd better toughen up if I wanted my inheritance. "What did you do?" Priscilla asked. I refused to be part of it. Went to the territorial authorities with proof of what he'd done. The scandal nearly destroyed him, but it definitely destroyed our family. He disowned me, Preston sided with him, and I left with nothing but the clothes on my back. That must have been terribly difficult. Parker's jaw tightened. Not as difficult as living with myself if I'd stayed silent. I worked ranch jobs for years, saving every penny until I could buy this place. It's small, but it's honest. Everything here I earned with my own 2 hands. And your father and brother, my father died 3 years ago. Preston inherited what was left of the ranch after the legal battles, but he's been running it into the ground. He's got all of our father's ambition, but none of his business sense. Parker looked at her directly. That's the past those women in town meant. The son who betrayed his father, even if it was for the right reasons. Priscilla considered his words carefully. I think it takes tremendous courage to stand up for what's right, especially against your own family. Surprise flickered across his face. Most people around here thought I was a fool. A man's family is supposed to come first out here. Not before one's principles, she countered. My father taught me that. They sat in silence for a while, the gentle breeze carrying the scent of pine and wildflowers. Finally, Parker spoke again. Preston came to ask for money. Again, he's deep in debt and the creditors are circling. I refused. Is that why he seemed so unsettling? Parker nodded. Preston can be charming when he wants something, but there's a meanness in him that comes from our father. I've been paying off his debts for years, trying to keep him afloat, but I'm done. He needs to stand on his own. I understand, Priscilla said, and she found that she truly did. The man beside her was honorable in a way Judge Wilson, for all his position and respectability, had not been. There's something else you should know, Parker said, his voice quieter. The reason I was in town that day when the judge rejected you, I'd gone to file final paperwork on a water rights purchase. This last piece of land will make the ranch self-sufficient, no matter how dry the seasons get. He looked out over the valley. I've been working toward this for 8 years. Everything I've earned has gone back into the ranch. That's why, he hesitated. That's why I haven't pushed for a real marriage between us. It wouldn't be fair to ask that of you when I can't offer much besides hard work and simple living. Priscilla felt a sudden warmth in her chest. Parker, you offered me a home when I had nowhere to go. You've been nothing but respectful and kind. That's more than many wives can say of their husbands, no matter how wealthy. He turned to look at her, really look at her, perhaps for the first time. You've changed things around here. The house feels like a home now. I've tried, she replied simply. You've done more than try. His hand moved hesitantly toward hers, then stopped. Priscilla, I know this isn't what you came west for. If you want to leave, once you've saved some money or made other arrangements, I won't stop you. The offer surprised her. Do you want me to leave? No, he said quietly. But I want you to have a choice. A real one, not just the desperate decision you made that day in the judge's office. Priscilla considered his words, looking out over the beautiful valley that was becoming her home. I think, she said carefully, that sometimes the best choices are the ones we never planned to make. She reached out and took his hand. His palm was rough with calluses, warm and strong against her skin. For a moment, they sat in silence, their joined hands a bridge across the uncertainty between them. The next few weeks brought subtle changes to the Montgomery ranch. Parker began taking his meals with Priscilla, lingering at the table to talk instead of hurrying back to work. She learned about ranching, how to predict weather from the behavior of animals, how to mend fences, even how to ride properly across the rugged terrain. In turn, she shared stories of her life in Boston, her parents, and the books she loved. Parker proved to be an attentive listener, often asking questions that revealed his quick intelligence despite his lack of formal education. One evening, as they sat on the porch watching the sunset, Parker mentioned a community gathering in Lewiston the following weekend. It's a harvest dance at the church, he explained. Nothing fancy, but the whole county turns out. Might be a good chance for you to meet some of the other ranchers' wives." "I'd like that," Priscilla replied, realizing she'd had little social interaction since arriving. "Do you usually attend?" "Not in recent years." He looked slightly embarrassed. Didn't see much point in going alone. The dance became something to look forward to. Priscilla spent evenings reworking one of her better dresses, adding fresh trim and altering the fit. Parker watched her sewing by lamplight, occasionally asking questions about the process. The night of the dance arrived clear and warm. Parker had bathed and put on his good clothes, a clean white shirt, dark vest, and pants that showed little wear. When Priscilla emerged in her refurbished blue dress, her hair arranged in careful curls, he stared at her with undisguised admiration. "You look beautiful," he said simply. "Thank you." She felt suddenly shy under his gaze. "You clean up rather well yourself, Mr. Montgomery." The church hall was decorated with autumn leaves and harvest bounty. Lanterns hung from the rafters, casting a warm glow over the gathering of ranchers, townsfolk, and their families. A small band played in one corner while children darted between the adults. Their entrance caused a ripple of curiosity. Many people had heard of Parker Montgomery's sudden marriage but hadn't yet met his bride. Priscilla held her head high as they moved through the crowd, Parker's hand steady at the small of her back. Several women approached to introduce themselves, their initial reserve melting as Priscilla expressed genuine interest in their lives and families. Parker was drawn into conversations with neighboring ranchers, though Priscilla noticed he kept her within sight. "Mrs. Montgomery," a familiar voice interrupted her conversation with the blacksmith's wife. "How unexpected to see you here." Judge Wilson stood before her, a young woman in an expensive dress on his arm. His expression suggested he'd hoped to avoid this encounter. "Good evening, Judge Wilson," Priscilla replied evenly. "I believe congratulations are in order. This must be Miss Harrington." "Indeed. Amelia, this is Mrs. Montgomery." The judge's introduction was perfunctory, lacking any explanation of their prior connection. Miss Harrington's assessing gaze took in Priscilla's dress and simple jewelry. "Charmed, I'm sure. Are you new to the territory?" Before Priscilla could answer, Parker appeared at her side. "Evening, Judge," he said, his voice cordial but cool. "Miss Harrington, welcome to Lewiston." He placed a protective hand on Priscilla's waist. "I see you've met my wife." Judge Wilson's discomfort was evident. "Yes, we were just becoming acquainted." "Actually, the judge and I are already acquainted," Priscilla said, finding unexpected pleasure in the judge's discomfort. "He was kind enough to provide our marriage license." Miss Harrington looked confused. "I thought Reverend Adams performed most of the marriages in town." "Special circumstances," Parker said smoothly, his eyes never leaving the judge's. Priscilla was originally promised to someone else, but that gentleman lacked the honor to keep his word. "I was fortunate enough to step in." Understanding dawned on Miss Harrington's face. "Oh, you're the mail-order bride mother mentioned." Her voice carried just far enough that several heads turned in their direction. Judge Wilson's face flushed dark red. "Amelia, perhaps we should greet the Thompsons." "But I want to hear more about—" Miss Harrington's protest was cut short as the judge practically dragged her away. "I'm sorry about that," Parker said quietly. "Small towns have long memories." "It doesn't matter," Priscilla replied, surprising herself with how true the words felt. "The judge did me a favor, though he didn't intend to." Parker's expression softened as he looked at her. "Would you care to dance, Mrs. Montgomery?" "I'd be delighted, Mr. Montgomery." He led her onto the floor as the musicians struck up a waltz. Parker proved to be a competent dancer, guiding her with the same sure confidence he showed on horseback. As they moved among the other couples, Priscilla realized she no longer felt like an outsider in this community. "You're fitting in well," Parker observed, seeming to read her thoughts. "Mrs. Thompson already invited you to her quilting circle. And Mr. Peterson asked if you'd consider selling some of my preserves in his store," Priscilla added. "Apparently, your reputation for bachelor cooking was well established," Parker laughed, the sound warming her more than it should. 8 years of beans and biscuits will do that." As the evening progressed, Priscilla found herself enjoying Parker's company more than she had expected. He was attentive without hovering, introducing her to people he thought she might like, bringing her punch when she was thirsty. Small gestures, but meaningful ones. The ride home was peaceful under a canopy of stars. Parker kept the horses at a gentle pace, seemingly in no hurry to end the evening. "Thank you for suggesting the dance," Priscilla said as the ranch came into view. "I enjoyed myself more than I thought possible." "So did I," Parker admitted. "It's been a long time since I've had such pleasant company." He helped her down from the buggy, his hands lingering at her waist a moment longer than necessary. In the silvery moonlight, his expression was unguarded, revealing an emotion Priscilla hadn't seen before: longing, perhaps, or hope. "Priscilla," he said softly, "I've been thinking, that is, if you're comfortable with it, maybe it's time I stopped sleeping in the bunkhouse." Her heart quickened. "Yes," she replied simply, "I think it is." That night, as Parker slipped into bed beside her for the first time, there was a moment of awkward uncertainty. Then, with gentle hands and whispered words of reassurance, he drew her into his arms. Their first kiss was tentative, a question rather than a demand, but it soon deepened into something more. In the darkness, they discovered each other, his broad shoulders and the scar along his ribs from a long-ago ranch accident, her soft curves and the birthmark behind her ear. With patient tenderness, Parker made her his wife in truth, his reverent touches and quiet words of praise healing wounds left by years of loneliness. Afterward, as she lay with her head on his chest, listening to the steady beat of his heart, Priscilla realized something had fundamentally changed between them. This wasn't just an arrangement of convenience anymore. Something new and fragile was growing, something neither of them had expected. "Parker," she whispered, not sure if he was still awake. His fingers traced lazy patterns on her shoulder. "I'm glad the judge rejected me." His chest rumbled with quiet laughter. "So am I." Summer faded into autumn, and autumn gave way to winter. The first snow fell in early November, transforming the ranch into a wonderland of white. Inside the snug house, Priscilla and Parker established new routines for the cold season, mending equipment by the fire, preserving the last of the harvest, planning improvements for spring. Their marriage deepened with each passing day. Parker was no longer just the man who had rescued her, but her partner in all things. He taught her to shoot a rifle and ride astride like a proper rancher's wife. She taught him to read poetry and dance in their kitchen by firelight. News from town came less frequently as the snow made travel difficult, but occasional visitors brought updates. Judge Wilson and his new bride had moved to Helena, where his political ambitions might be better served. Preston Montgomery had sold what remained of his father's ranch and headed for California, leaving behind a trail of unpaid debts and broken promises. One particularly cold December night, as they lay wrapped in quilts in each other's arms, Parker confessed something he'd been holding back. "I knew who you were before that day in the judge's office," he said, his voice barely audible over the howling wind outside. "I'd seen you arrive on the stagecoach, thought you were the prettiest woman I'd ever laid eyes on." Priscilla propped herself up on one elbow to look at him. "You never told me that." His fingers traced the curve of her cheek. "I went to the courthouse that day hoping to catch another glimpse of you when I heard how the judge was treating you." He shook his head. "I couldn't bear it. Couldn't bear the thought of you having to leave, or worse, being stranded with nowhere to go." "So your proposal wasn't entirely spontaneous," she murmured. "The timing was. The thought," he hesitated. "The thought of you as my wife had already crossed my mind. I just never imagined it might actually happen." Priscilla lowered her head to kiss him gently. "I'm glad it did." "So am I," he whispered against her lips. "More than you know." Christmas brought a heavy snowstorm that left them truly isolated for days. They celebrated quietly, exchanging modest gifts: a new scarf she'd knitted for him, a beautiful leather-bound journal he'd ordered from Denver months earlier. The isolation felt less like confinement and more like a cocoon, sheltering them from the outside world. As winter slowly released its grip on the land, Priscilla began to suspect a new change was coming. The telltale signs were familiar from watching her mother's pregnancies years ago: the subtle changes in her body, the unexpected fatigue, the aversion to certain foods. She waited until she was certain before telling Parker. On the first truly warm day of spring, she asked him to walk with her to the north pasture, their special place. The wildflowers were just beginning to bloom, tiny bursts of color against the new grass. "I have something to tell you," she said as they stood looking out over their land. Parker turned to her, concern crossing his features. "Is everything all right? Everything is wonderful." She took his hand and placed it gently on her still flat stomach. "We're going to have a baby." The expression that bloomed across his face was one she would remember for the rest of her life: wonder and joy, and a kind of awestruck disbelief all mingled together. "A baby," he repeated, as if testing the word. "Our baby." "Yes," tears of happiness blurred her vision. "Due in late autumn, I think." Parker dropped to his knees before her, pressing his face against her middle. When he looked up, his eyes shone with unshed tears. "Thank you," he whispered, "for coming west, for staying, for making my life so much more than I ever dreamed it could be." Priscilla cradled his face in her hands. "Thank you for signing your name beside mine that day. It was the best thing that ever happened to me." He rose to his feet and pulled her into a tender embrace. "I love you, Priscilla Montgomery. With everything I am and everything I have, I love you." It was the first time he'd said the words aloud, though she'd seen them in his actions for months. "I love you too, Parker, more than I thought possible." As they stood there, wrapped in each other's arms with the promise of new life growing between them, Priscilla thought of the desperate young woman who had stepped off the stagecoach in Lewiston a year earlier. How strange and wonderful that rejection had led her here, to this man, this land, this life. The journey west had brought her home in ways she could never have imagined. "What shall we name the baby?" Parker asked, his hand gentle on her stomach. "William, if it's a boy, after your father," she suggested. "Not to honor what he did, but to remember where you came from and the difficult choice you made." Parker's expression softened. "And if it's a girl, Hope," Priscilla said without hesitation, "because that's what we've found together." 5 years later, Priscilla sat on the porch of their expanded ranch house, watching Parker teaching their son William to ride his pony while 3-year-old Hope played with her rag doll nearby. The ranch had prospered, growing to 3 times its original size. The house now boasted glass windows, a proper kitchen, and even a small library filled with books. Judge Wilson had indeed become a politician in Helena, occasionally appearing in the territorial newspaper. Priscilla sometimes wondered if he ever regretted his decision that day, but the thought carried no bitterness anymore. Preston had returned to Montana the previous year, chastened by failure in California and seeking a fresh start. To Priscilla's surprise, Parker had offered his brother work as a ranch hand, with the possibility of earning a small stake in the operation if he proved reliable. So far, Preston was keeping his promises, perhaps finally learning from his brother's example. The Montgomery name was now one of respect in the county. Parker served on the school board and the water commission, his integrity and fairness making him a natural leader despite his initial reluctance to take on such roles. As for Priscilla, she had found purpose beyond anything she'd imagined in Boston. Besides managing their growing household, she taught reading to neighboring children once a week and had started a small business selling her preserves and baked goods in Lewiston. Her recipe for wild berry jam had won a blue ribbon at the territorial fair. "Mama, look," William called as he guided his pony in a careful circle, his father's hand hovering nearby. "I'm riding by myself, wonderful," she called back, her heart swelling with pride. At 4, William already showed Parker's steadiness and determination. Hope abandoned her doll and ran to Priscilla, climbing into her lap. "Story, Mama," she demanded, her dark curls bouncing. "Once upon a time," Priscilla began, the familiar words coming easily, "there was a brave young woman who traveled all the way across the country to marry a judge. But the judge was mean," Hope supplied, having heard this story many times. "Yes, he was. But then a kind cowboy came along, and do you remember what he said?" Hope's face brightened. I'll sign my name beside yours. That's right. And they built a beautiful life together with a wonderful daughter and son, and they lived happily ever after. Parker approached, swinging William up onto his shoulders. Telling our story again, he asked, leaning down to kiss Priscilla. It's Hope's favorite, she replied, reaching up to touch his face. Mine too, Parker said softly. He sat beside her on the porch steps, settling William between them. Though I think we're still writing it. As the sun began to set over their land, Priscilla looked at her family, the husband who had claimed her when no one else would, the children born of their love, the home they had built together. The mail-order bride who had been rejected had found something far more valuable than the security she'd sought. She had found love in the most unexpected place, with the most unexpected man. And when Parker reached for her hand, entwining his fingers with hers just as he had signed his name beside hers all those years ago, Priscilla knew with absolute certainty that their story was indeed still being written, and that every chapter would be more beautiful than the last.